The 1960s gave birth to some of the most influential bands in music history, yet not all stayed in the spotlight. Some rocketed to stardom only to fade away, leaving behind just a few hits or a brief moment of glory. While these groups once dominated the charts, they've since slipped into obscurity. What happened to those bands that helped define a generation, yet are now barely remembered? Stay tuned as we uncover the stories of the 20 best forgotten bands of the 60s. 1. Paul Revere and the Raiders. Paul Revere and the Raiders stormed into the music scene from Boise, Idaho, in 1958, originally under the name The Downbeats. Known for their revolutionary war-inspired attire, they quickly became a favorite of the mid-60s rock crowd. Led by keyboardist Paul Revere and charismatic vocalist Mark Lindsay, the band mixed rock with a bit of theatricality. Hits like Just Like Me, Kicks, and Hungry dominated the airwaves, with the band earning a total of 12 top 30 hits between 1966 and 1969. Their energetic performances, especially on Dick Clark's Where the Action Is, made them household names. Despite their success, the band's momentum slowed by the early 70s. A 1971 hit, Indian Reservation, briefly revived them, but internal struggles and fading popularity led to their breakup by 1975. Paul Revere continued performing in various iterations until his death in 2014, but the original lineup never recaptured their earlier fame. 2. The Seekers. The Seekers, a folk-pop quartet from Melbourne, Australia, burst onto the international scene in the 1960s. With Judith Durham's pristine voice leading the way, the group captured the hearts of audiences worldwide. Their unique blend of folk harmonies and pop sensibilities made hits like I'll Never Find Another You, The Carnival Is Over, and Georgie Girl major chart successes. They became the first Australian band to achieve significant chart success in both the UK and the US. By 1968, however, fame came with a price. Durham announced her departure to pursue a solo career, leading to the group's disbandment. While bandmate Keith Potker formed the New Seekers, which saw its own success, the original group left an indelible mark on the music world. The Seekers reunited multiple times for tours, with their final performance together happening in 2013. Judith Durham's death in 2022 marked the closing of the Seekers' iconic chapter. 3. Barry Sadler. Barry Sadler was not your typical 1960s musician. He was a soldier first, with his biggest hit reflecting his military roots. Sadler served as a Green Beret medic during the Vietnam War, and in 1966 he penned The Ballad of the Green Berets, a patriotic anthem that rocketed to #1 on the Billboard charts for 5 consecutive weeks. The song's military pride stood in stark contrast to the rising anti-war sentiment of the era. However, Sadler struggled to maintain this success, with follow-up singles like The A-Team failing to capture the same magic. Turning to writing, Sadler authored a series of military-themed pulp novels. His later years were plagued by personal struggles, including a controversial manslaughter case in 1978. In 1988, Sadler was mysteriously shot in the head in Guatemala and never fully recovered, passing away in 1989. His career, once a symbol of patriotism, faded into the shadows of time. 4. The Marcels. The Marcels made their mark in the early 60s with a sound that took doo-wop to the next level. Formed in Pittsburgh in 1959, the multiracial group rose to fame with their 1961 smash hit, a rock and roll take on the classic ballad Blue Moon. Opening with their now iconic Bomp Baba Bomp, the song shot to the top of the charts in both the US and the UK, making the Marcels instant stars. They followed up with Heartaches and My Melancholy Baby, but their success didn't last. Internal conflicts, lineup changes, and racial tensions during their tours in the South made it difficult for the group to maintain their momentum. By the mid-60s, the hits had dried up and the original lineup had disbanded. Though the Marcels reunited several times over the decades, their heyday remained a brief, shining moment in rock history. Their place in music, however, is forever immortalized with Blue Moon. 5. Blood, Sweat and Tears. Blood, Sweat and Tears revolutionized rock by blending it with jazz, creating a unique sound that dominated the late 60s. Formed in 1967, the group's second album, Blood, Sweat and Tears, became a massive success, winning the Grammy for Album of the Year and producing hits like Spinning Wheel, You've Made Me So Very Happy, and When I Die. The brass section was integral to their sound, setting them apart from other rock bands of the time. However, their meteoric rise was followed by a steep decline. Internal conflicts, particularly between members and lead vocalist David Clayton Thomas, and the controversial decision to tour Eastern Europe during the Vietnam War, caused a backlash at home. By the early 1970s, the band's popularity had waned. Though they continued to release albums and perform, they never regained their initial commercial success, fading into obscurity by the mid-70s. 6. The Rascals. The Rascals, originally known as the Young Rascals, exploded onto the music scene in 1965 with a blend of rock and blue-eyed soul. Formed in Garfield, New Jersey, the group featured the smooth vocals of Felix Cavaliere and the harmonizing talents of Eddie Brigati. Their hits like Good Lovin', Groovin', and the socially conscious People Got to Be Free were not just chart toppers, but anthems of the time. Known for their energetic performances and memorable songs, they made waves in the late 60s. Despite their initial success, tensions within the band grew. Eddie Brigati left in 1970, and by 1972, the group disbanded after releasing albums that didn't capture the magic of their earlier work. Though they reunited in 2012 for a brief stint, the band never regained its former glory. Still, the Rascals left an indelible mark on the world of 60s rock and soul. 7. The Fifth Dimension. The Fifth Dimension soared to fame with their harmonious blend of pop, soul, and psychedelic sounds in the late 60s. Their biggest hits like Up, Up and Away and the infectious Aquarius Let the Sunshine In became anthems of the era. Formed in 1965, the five members Marilyn McCoo, Billy Davis Jr., Florence LaRue, Lamont McLemore, and Ron Townsend captivated audiences with their soulful harmonies and vibrant stage presence. Known for working with legendary songwriters like Jimmy Webb and Laura Nyro, their music crossed genres and generations. However, as the 1970s progressed, their popularity waned. McCoo and Davis left to pursue a successful duet career, and the remaining members struggled to maintain the momentum. Despite the breakup, the Fifth Dimension's timeless hits continue to define the optimism of the late 60s, securing their place in pop music history. 8. The Shadows. The Shadows were instrumental, literally, in shaping the sound of early British rock and roll. Originally Cliff Richard's backing band, they stepped into their own spotlight with hits like Apache and Wonderful Land. Their twangy guitars and tight rhythms influenced generations of guitarists, including big names like Eric Clapton and Brian May. Formed in the late 50s, the band consisted of Hank Marvin, Bruce Welch, and Brian Bennett, who became synonymous with the surf rock style that defined an era before the British invasion. The Shadows racked up 69 UK chart singles, including 35 instrumental hits. But by the late 60s, their instrumental style fell out of favor as vocals dominated the charts. Though they reunited sporadically in later decades, their peak era was over. Still, their legacy as pioneers of instrumental rock remains untouchable, and their guitar-driven sound continues to inspire musicians worldwide. 9. The Dave Clark Five. The Dave Clark Five, often seen as rivals to the Beatles during the British invasion, burst onto the scene with their punchy, drum-driven sound. Hits like Glad All Over and Bits and Pieces made them chart regulars, especially in the U.S., where they scored 17 top 40 hits. Their energetic performances and Dave Clark's driving drums set them apart from other bands of the time. Despite their early success and frequent appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show, the band's popularity began to fade by the late 60s. By 1970, the hits had dried up, and they disbanded shortly after. Though Dave Clark remained involved in the music business and secured rights to their recordings, the band's presence faded from the public eye. Their brief but electric burst in the 1960s still makes them a standout in the era of British invasion legends. 10. The Archies. The Archies were the quintessential bubblegum pop band, and they weren't even real. Created as a fictional band for The Archie Show, they became one of the biggest acts of the late 60s thanks to their mega hit Sugar Sugar, which topped the charts in 1969 and became the year's biggest hit. Vocalist Ron Dante brought life to Archie Andrews' singing voice, and their catchy, sugary tunes like Jingle Jangle kept fans hooked. Despite being a cartoon, their music was everywhere. However, as the bubblegum pop craze faded in the early 70s, so did the Archies. They released a few more tracks, but the momentum was gone. Although they disappeared from the music charts, their songs continued to be nostalgic favorites. 11. The Chambers Brothers. The Chambers Brothers were pioneers in blending gospel, soul, and psychedelic rock, creating a revolutionary sound in the late 60s. Hailing from Mississippi, the four brothers, George, Willie, Lester, and Joe, began their musical journey singing gospel in their local church. After moving to Los Angeles, they added folk influences and electrified their sound, attracting attention in the city's burgeoning music scene. Their breakout hit, Time Has Come Today, became an anthem of the counterculture movement, celebrated for its hypnotic extended psychedelic instrumental breaks. The addition of drummer Brian Keenan, a white musician, also challenged racial norms of the time. Despite their unique fusion of styles and their explosive live performances, they struggled to sustain mainstream success beyond the 60s. Their diverse catalog, however, remains a testament to their genre-crossing impact. The Chambers Brothers' music still resonates, but the group slowly faded from the spotlight after the release of a few less successful albums. 12. The Amboy Dukes. The Amboy Dukes formed in 1964 in Chicago and became known for their hard-edged mix of acid rock and proto-metal. Led by the young and fiery guitarist Ted Nugent, the band gained fame with their 1968 hit, Journey to the Center of the Mind, a mind-expanding track with a distinct psychedelic flair. While Nugent's guitar virtuosity was the centerpiece of their sound, Steve Farmer's lyrics added a trippy, drug-fueled mystique to the band's image. As the psychedelic era faded, Nugent steered the group toward a heavier rock sound, positioning them as early pioneers of proto-metal. However, frequent lineup changes and Nugent's growing dominance led to the band evolving into his backing band. By 1975, Nugent had transitioned to a successful solo career, leaving the Amboy Dukes behind. The band's psychedelic legacy is now overshadowed by Nugent's later success, but Journey to the Center of the Mind remains a classic of its era. 13. Sham the Pharaohs. Sham the Pharaohs burst onto the scene in 1965 with their quirky, infectious hit, Wooly Bully, a song filled with nonsense lyrics and a thumping Tex-Mex beat. Led by Domingo Sam Samudio, the group embraced a theatrical persona, donning Middle Eastern attire and performing high-energy shows that delighted fans. Their use of humor and novelty set them apart from the more serious rock acts of the era. Follow-up hits like Lil Red Riding Hood and Juju Hand solidified their place in pop history, with Lil Red Riding Hood reaching number 2 on the Billboard charts. Despite their success, they struggled to move beyond their novelty act image, which limited their artistic growth. By the late 60s, the band had faded from the mainstream. Samudio pursued a brief solo career, winning a Grammy for album liner notes in 1971, but the group's infectious sound lives on through their iconic hit Wooly Bully. 14. Jan and Dean. Jan and Dean were pioneers of the surf rock sound that defined the early 60s, famously capturing the carefree Southern California lifestyle in their hits like Surf City and The Little Old Lady from Pasadena. The duo, composed of Jan Berry and Dean Torrance, formed while in high school and initially sang doo-wop before transitioning to surf music. Their close relationship with the Beach Boys' Brian Wilson resulted in their biggest hit, Surf City, co-written by Wilson and the first surf song to top the charts. The pair's harmonies and fun-loving lyrics made them hugely popular, but tragedy struck in 1966 when Jan was severely injured in a car accident, leaving him with lasting disabilities. Although their mainstream career was effectively over, the duo made occasional comebacks in later years. Torrance found success as a graphic designer, while Barry continued to struggle with health issues until he died in 2004. Despite the crash, Jan and Dean's music remains iconic in the surf rock genre. 15. The Searchers. The Searchers were a key part of the British invasion, bringing their jangly guitars and sweet harmonies to audiences worldwide. Formed in Liverpool in 1957 by John McNally, the band started as a skiffle group before transitioning to rock and roll. Their big break came with hits like Sweets for My Sweet and Needles and Pins, both of which showcase their knack for blending catchy melodies with heartfelt lyrics. Alongside the Beatles and other Liverpool bands, the Searchers became regulars at the Cavern Club, establishing themselves as a vital part of the Merseybeat scene. Their sound, which featured a distinctive 12-string guitar, influenced future generations of power pop and jangle pop musicians. Though their popularity waned in the late 60s, the Searchers remained active, continuing to tour for decades. They officially announced their retirement in 2019, but fan demand brought them back for more farewell tours, proving their enduring appeal after nearly 70 years in the music business. 16. Hermits. Herman's Hermits skyrocketed to fame in the 60s with their playful bubblegum sound, led by frontman Peter Noone. Tracks like Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter, and I'm Henry VIII, I Am were irresistible, dominating both the UK and US charts. For a time, they even outsold the Beatles in America. Their charm came from their cheeky, non-threatening vibe and catchy melodies. Despite a promising start, they were pigeonholed as a novelty act, and as tastes shifted in the late 60s, their clean-cut image didn't quite fit the growing counterculture scene. After several lineup changes and legal disputes over the use of their name, the band gradually faded, with Noone pursuing a solo career while the Hermits continued to tour. They remain a nostalgic icon, but their biggest hits are now echoes of a lost era. 17. Manfred Man. Manfred Man burst out of London's 1960s scene with an eclectic blend of R&B, jazz, and pop. Led by keyboardist Manfred Man, they made waves with hits like Doo-Wah Diddy Diddy and Pretty Flamingo. They stood out by infusing their music with unique instrumentation, featuring flutes, vibes, and saxophones, creating a jazz-tinged sound that was distinctly their own. Their lineup shifted when frontman Paul Jones left, replaced by Mike Dabo, but their success continued with the Dylan-inspired hit Mighty Quinn. Yet, like many British invasion bands, their peak couldn't last forever. By the late 60s, they disbanded, only for Man to form the progressive rock group Manfred Man's Earth Band, which found success in the 1970s. Though they're less remembered today, their contribution to 60s pop still resonates. 18. The Youngbloods. The Youngbloods captured the spirit of peace and love with their 1967 anthem Get Together, a track that has come to symbolize the idealism of the 60s. Led by Jesse Colin Young, the band blended folk, rock, and psychedelia to create a mellow yet powerful sound. While their message of unity struck a chord with the counterculture, commercial success was fleeting. The departure of founding member Jerry Corbett in 1969 marked the beginning of the end. They attempted to evolve with albums like Elephant Mountain, featuring deeper, more complex arrangements, but they never managed to recapture the same magic. By the early 70s, the Youngbloods faded from the mainstream, leaving behind a legacy that's wrapped in nostalgia for those who remember their brief time at the top. 19. Procol Harum. Procol Harum stormed the world with the hauntingly beautiful A Whiter Shade of Pale in 1967, a song so iconic it's often considered one of the greatest tracks of all time. Combining rock with classical influences, their debut single showcased an ambitious sound that helped shape the emerging progressive rock genre. Despite the early success, internal tensions and constant lineup changes meant that Procol Harum struggled to keep their momentum going. Their albums, while critically respected, failed to achieve widespread commercial success. After breaking up in 1977, The band would reunite sporadically in later years, but they never again captured the heights of their early fame. Today, they're best remembered for that one unforgettable hit that seems to play forever in the background of the 60s. 20. The Kingsmen. The Kingsmen are synonymous with their raw, raucous recording of Louie Louie, a garage rock classic that stormed the charts in 1963 and became a staple of frat parties and garage bands everywhere. Though the song's unintelligible lyrics sparked rumors of obscenity and even drew an FBI investigation, this only added to its rebellious charm. Despite their major hit, internal conflicts saw the departure of lead vocalist Jack Ely, leading to a splintered band identity. While they released a string of singles afterward, none reached the iconic status of Louie Louie. Over time, the Kingsmen faded into obscurity, with members pursuing other ventures. Yet their contribution to rock history is undeniable, with Louie Louie standing as a beacon of rock's raw, rebellious energy. If you enjoyed this trip through musical history, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay tuned for more similar videos. Don't forget to drop a comment with your favorite band from this list. See you next time.